Hello, everybody. My name is Päivi Meijer from R&B Nordic, representing here the risk motivation profile in Nordic countries. Very happy to see you all and welcome you to our webinar. We have a great pleasure having here Dr. Jason Jones, the author of the book Activator, and the webinar topic is the new science of performance, the neuroscience of leadership and motivation. We will record this meeting and we will also share this with those who signed up and couldn't participate. If you have any questions or comments to Dr. Jones, please put them in the chat. And then if we have time at the end, we can also have a discussion. But with this, warmly welcome Dr. Jason Jones, and we are very happy to have you here. And now the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Päivi, and good to be here with you all, no matter where you are around the world. It's great to have you here, and I'm excited to share some of this information with you, and hopes that it is helpful for you in your role and your profession and what you do. I know we have a lot of people doing a lot of different things. Whether you are an HR practitioner or you're a coach of any sort, a sports coach, an executive coach, a leadership coach, if you're in your own private practice, if you are a professor, no matter what role that you're in, I think what you're going to find today is the information that I share can be helpful for you. Because we're all in different roles, and even in our life roles, where I believe that we can use and utilize the information I'm going to be sharing with you today. So thank you for having me, and let's get the show on the road here. I want to start off by saying, first of all, that this, what I'm going to be sharing with you is what I call the new science of performance. And this is a way of looking at all of the great research we have out there. We have now literally decades, and now we're going into almost close to 2 centuries of information and research related to motivation and thoughts around motivation and the science around that. And then how do we look at this in the context of bringing out the best of people? Because there's a tremendous amount of research around that as well. In particular, the latest of this research is in the neuroscience. And so when we look at neuroscience research, we're seeing that there's so much here that we can learn about the brain, how the brain functions, and how we can be our best. And so today I'm going to be sharing kind of piece parts of what I believe, and through my research that I've been able to see of how we can glean from the research from a number of different researchers, specifically Dr. Stephen Reese and his research with his team, but also around the brain research. I'll mention a little bit of Deci and Ryan. I know some of you are familiar with their research in motivation. So we're going to blend some of these things together and then give you 7 really practical strategies to actually put into place for your leadership or to help anyone with their performance. And so that's really kind of the direction that we're going on, is putting this theory and these ideas around motivation into practice, specifically for leadership and performance, and giving you 7 strategies to actually put into place. Now, my job is to try to give you all of this in 1 hour. So that's going to be a task. I'm going to go at this pretty quickly. You're probably going to have a lot of notes to write down, but if you have a question, put those in the chat. If we have some time, we'll get to those. If we don't, email me. I'll be happy to do my best to answer any questions that you have. So my perspective, and just so you know my background, I worked on a PhD at the University of Oklahoma back in the early 2000s. I defended in 2002, and I did a dissertation on motivation and performance in a work environment. I specifically worked with the United States Postal Service Training Center and helped look at what was the motivations of people going into that and how that dictated their effort on the job, their motivation, and ultimately their performance. It was during that time I utilized a lot of the most contemporary research at that time related to motivation, which was Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory. Now, I'll mention this a couple of times. It's also important to note that that Dr. Rees did not fully agree with Deci and Ryan and their perspective. There were some pieces of that he thought held water, but there are other pieces of it that he thought was not fully validated through the research. I'll mention some of this kind of off and on about the parts that I believe that have been really helpful, especially in a practical application in the workplace. But we'll lean more on Rees's research and how I utilize that as well, and how I believe it supports bringing out the best of people and actually supports brain mechanism, brain function at its optimal level. So that's kind of where we're going with this, the direction we're going with this. And as we think about the brain, I look at this now as I moved out of my dissertation work and into practice as an organizational psychologist and working with leaders and organizations. I began to really dive into the brain science piece of this, looking at a lot of the studies that were out there related to brain optimization and performance, even looking at the flow theory and some of the great research that's come out of that from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, Stephen Kotler more recently, and the Flow Research Collective. And there's some really fascinating things around how the brain actually works and what we can do from a practical perspective, not as neuroscientists or surgeons or anything like that, but as practitioners from a psychological perspective, what we can do to help enhance and optimize the brain. And that's a lot of what I'm going to kind of get into with you today. This, I believe, is the future of performance. As we get and know the brain more, we merge the neuroscience with the psychological science. It's going to really enhance our ability to learn and understand the brain and help others to be able to maximize and optimize their brain. Now, this is being used in a lot of areas now. We're seeing this, and some of you are practicing these things right now, whether it be in therapy, counseling, sports psychology, health, anything at work, productivity, that sort of thing. Sales and marketing, utilizing this information a great deal. And I've got a good friend who is the CEO and started an organization called Marketing Brainology. And the entire services they provide is helping do brain scans, look at EEG and brain waves related to print and video marketing and commercials. And so it's a fascinating area where we're actually looking at, do these things motivate people? Do they engage people to want to engage in brands and buy certain products? Now, we're going to be talking specifically today about how do we apply this in leadership. And so that's the direction and fun that we'll have with that. Now, to get us going, I want to share with you what I think are 3 of the top principles to know for the neuroscience of leadership and performance. Now, certainly there are many other principles, but these are kind of some overarching principles where we can take the research, the data, and we can look at it and say, hey, these are some principles that we can use as a ballast to guide our interventions, to guide the way that we help other people. And so these 3 principles are rather simple, but when you see these are ways that actually help us to apply, and you're going to see this throughout the strategies that I share with you. So the first principle, neuroscience principle, I think is important to know, is that your mind controls your brain. Okay, so this is what's very unique about us humans, is that yes, we have a brain. It is an organ, just like any other organ in our body, but we have this consciousness. We have this ability to step out of our brain and determine, for the most part, determine what we want to do, how we want to think, how we want to behave. Now, we know there's some limitations to this, and certain piece of this is harder for some people than it is for others. But basically, what we know is that we have the capability to tell our brain what and how we want to do things, or who we want to be, what we want to pursue. This is what we call our consciousness. And there is quite a bit of information out there related to consciousness, but it's really difficult to really nail it down in terms of understanding it fully. But this principle reminds us that we have control of our brain, that it's not just an organ that just does whatever it wants to do. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about how this is specifically found in our prefrontal cortex and how it really helps us to keep in check all of the other mechanisms of our brain that may be more automatic, and also succumb to some of the other motivations that are out there. Your mind controlling your brain is actually a key component, a key principle that is a support to Rees's basic desires theory, because it really is found, these desires can be found in the way that we pursue things from an intrinsic perspective, can be found in our prefrontal lobe, in our consciousness. We also know that neuroplasticity is a major piece of this, that we can change based on what we think, how we determine what we want to do. We can literally change and rewire our brain over time. Your brain does not have to stay the same, and it can grow even till the day that you die into old age. We now know that you can grow new brain cells. We used to not think that. 30 years ago, we used to think that you only had a certain amount of brain cells and they died off over a lifetime. That's not the case. Neurogenesis actually happens if you do the right things, if you're learning, if you're growing, if you have the social contact, even into old age. And then epigenetics is the newest kind of area around this, which is fascinating. Epigenetics is that the study that we all have genes, and we have expressions of our genes that actually have control over what we do, how we think, but also addiction. It has an effect on disease and sickness and illness and those things. Now, epigenetics now allows us to understand that we can actually turn on and turn off our genetic code based on our environment, based on what we think, and then what our behaviors are. This is fascinating, and you're going to hear more about this over the next 5 to 10 years as we learn how to control our body through our brain and learn how to manage our genetics in that way. It's really a fascinating area. How about neuroscience principle number 2? It's this, and that is your brain is wired to connect socially. And so I can't spend a lot of time here, but I think you all get this. The idea is that our brain is better and can thrive only when we are connected with other brains. None of us is our best on our own. Nothing is created at its highest level. None of us can perform at our best level by ourselves. No one can reach their highest potential by themselves. It takes others to help us with that. And this is a big principle of what I'm going to talk about in a moment, related to engagement support, motivation support, and ultimately our performance. Now, certainly there is a perspective of this, and Rees had this related to social contact. So this is deeper than social contact. What I want you to think about here is how we actually are able to support and work in conjunction with other brains and other people, and what that brings to the table. All of us only have a certain set of strengths. We also have weaknesses that we need others to help us out with. We can go back to the beginning when a child is born, a human is born. A human will fail to thrive and cease to live or develop naturally or functionally if they are not in connection with other brains, with other people, with a caring a mother or father that is with them. So we also see this into our adulthood. People who do not have good social support end up having many psychological problems, whether it be depression, anxiety, other things. And the more positive our social support is, the better the outcomes we see in people in terms of their life and how they thrive and their performance even on the job. So this is a really important principle. Here's the third principle, and that is that your brain can be lit up. And this is a fascinating thing for me, because the idea here is that what we see in brain scans, especially fMRIs, is that your brain can literally be lit up in certain environments and within certain interactions that you have with other people or within certain situations. So there's ways you can actually light up and learn to light up your own brain. And then you can be in situations where people help you light your brain up. Okay. And so I like to say, you're not going to ever motivate someone, but you can help build an environment and have interactions with people that can help them light their brain up. You can literally be someone who can light someone else up. And when the brain lights up in multiple areas, especially the more positive areas, this actually creates a more highly functioning brain, a more engaged brain, and a brain that actually can do more and can achieve more. This is actually, I wrote a book on this, and I'm going to talk to you about that in just a second. But one of the key research studies that I utilize in my book called Activator is this research by Richard Boyasis and Anthony Jack. And this was at Case Western Reserve University about 10 years ago or so, 10, 12 years ago. And they actually used fMRI studies. And what they did is they looked at they had participants reenact or rethink about how they felt, how they experienced an interaction with a boss. And they realized that there were kind of two groups of people, some who had positive interactions and some who had negative interactions. Those who had positive interactions, 14 regions of their brain lit up. 0 were deactivated or shut down. But guess what? What do you think about the negative interaction group? Only 6 regions were activated and 11 were deactivated. And these 11 deactivated areas are areas that you want people to have activated at work. They're areas related to creativity and to relationship management and to information processing and decision making. So literally, this research finds that when we take more of a dissonant style leadership, where we're demanding, we're controlling, we're micromanaging, where we're condescending, that actually shuts the brain down of people. While when we have these positive interactions, it lights the brain up in multiple areas and brings out the best in people. We've got a lot of research that shows this related to even the kind of the left prefrontal region related to resilience. We find that this can be lit up and more sensitive, even 30 times greater in resilient people than non-resilient people. There was a study that also showed this in terms of gratefulness, that it's in the center part of your prefrontal cortex. This area lights up more and becomes more sensitive when a person expresses gratitude. And the kind of outcome of this study actually kind of teaches us that the more that we practice gratitude, the more we see the world from a gratefulness perspective. And that's very important. Even if we just try to build the habits and just force ourselves to do this a couple of times a day, it actually makes this part of our brain more sensitive. It's like putting on glasses where we see the world from a perspective of more gratefulness and more gratitude. So this is why I wrote my book called Activator, really talking about this whole new science of performance. How do we bring in the brain science, the neuroscience, along with the behavioral science to be able to help us as people that are leaders, that are helping others to be their best and do their best. And really, when you break this all down, I like to say this is kind of in a nutshell, that brain activation, what I call being an activator, we do that through intentional interactions and experiences with other people. Now, what are those interactions and experiences? Well, I'm going to share those, what I believe those are, that are based in the research. I think it's important to know, too, that when we look from a brain standpoint and motivation, we can see how there are 3 kind of core areas of the brain that respond to or that behave related to our motivation. Our reptilian brain is this part of the brain that really is the automatic things. And this is where the fight or flight comes in. And so this is where, for millennia, humans have used intimidation, control, and threats. to be a big part of how we motivate people. And what you're doing here is you're utilizing really the dumbest part of the brain, the automatic part of the brain. And so you kind of have to keep utilizing that. And it's a non-renewable. It's a non-renewable motivation that we have. Control, how we control people. This has been used for millennia through different types of government, and how we control people. We'll do it through threat. We'll do it through intimidation and control. Now, there is a reward area of our brain, and that's more of the midbrain. And this area, we know this as a mammalian brain, and a lot of animals have this. And this is why we can train animals, and we use positive, negative reinforcements for them. And this allows us to be able to train and get a lot of the behaviors that we want from animals. Now, this has been applied as well for millennia to humans. The problem is, we now know through basic life, as well as through research, that if we try to motivate only through reward, that it is very limited. Yes, it works in the short term to some extent, but it's certainly not sustainable. And as people, our brains satiate, meaning you can give someone a raise or you can give someone a bonus, and they're excited and motivated for a short term, but at some point we satiate. We say, oh, this was great, but I'm worth more now. I need more now. It's kind of like when you get in the shower and turn on the hot water. It's hot, but a few minutes later, you're turning it hotter because you need it warmer. And a few minutes later, you turn it hotter and it steams up the entire bathroom. That is the concept of satiation. And we know in humans, we have this same mechanism, and it's found in this more human part of our brain, which is the cerebral cortex. But this is where purpose and values is really found when it comes to how motivation is sustained and utilized. And I believe this is where Stephen Rees and basic desires theory really comes into play, and that is, and really merges with brain science, because this is where sustainable motivation comes from, where long-term self-directed drive around a person pursuing certain goals and certain behaviors in their life. If it's going to be sustainable, it has to be through the cerebral cortex. And the way and the avenue through the cerebral cortex, and what I call the secret sauce for motivation, is through understanding of our purpose and values and the connection between what we do and what our purpose or what our values are. So that's kind of a motivation 101 from a brain perspective and a theoretical perspective. You can also look at this from even a neurochemical perspective. When you try to motivate someone specifically from a brainstem perspective, from threats and from this negative type of motivation, you get fear, anger, loss, embarrassment. These are the feelings you get from people. This is what you're relying on. A positive motivation where you're using more of the human brain, the cerebral cortex, more values and purpose, you're getting more of the empowerment, openness, hope, excitement, positive energy. And the neurochemicals that you're receiving from that are more dopamine and oxytocin. And dopamine, many people believe, is just a feel-good chemical, and it actually is. However, its primary purpose is motivation. Dopamine is a motivation chemical because it is an anticipation chemical that gets you moving because you believe you're anticipating some type of outcome. Oxytocin then comes in and it actually reinforces it. It bonds, it creates myelination in between your neurons that actually increases the probability that this type of behavior will continue to happen. Okay, it's really wiring the brain when you use more positive motivation. Now, negative motivation brings out more adrenaline and cortisol being the stress hormone, that it is also a motivation hormone as well. So cortisol is actually the hormone you feel when you're under pressure to get something done. A little bit of it is a good thing. A lot of it, or long-term with it in your system, causes a great deal or many health problems. And I think you all are familiar with what those health problems are. I don't need to go into that. Now, this shows you kind of the neurochemical perspective and how this has more of a long-term um, uh, motivational impact on us, whether it's through the way that we wire our brain, how we react, and then what our hormonal and neurochemical environment is and how that impacts our health long term. All right, let's get practical with this. I've given you a lot of information pretty quickly. And so you've got a lot of the biology of this. Let's get real practical for this, because ultimately what we're trying to do is drive performance and typically engagement. And we do that through motivation. And I certainly know that a person can be motivated and not engaged or not highly perform highly. However, I've never seen somebody perform highly and be engaged in something deeply without having motivation. And so the motivation, that connection there is highly important. And we want to see how we can get there. Through 20 years, a lot of people ask me, how long did it take you to write your book? And I will tell them, my answer is usually it took a year in writing and editing, but it was 20 years in developing the ideas and working with people around these ideas, presenting these ideas and getting feedback, even multiple conversations with Dr. Reese himself and having back and forth via email. I didn't get the opportunity to meet him face to face and in person, but we had emails back and forth. And several years later, I can appreciate his directness and his passion for basic desires theory. And you're going to see that in how what I put together as really this kind of new science of performance perspective. So the way I look at this and what I see in the research is that there are two core mechanisms for motivation to get us to engagement performance. There's an internal mechanism and an external mechanism. And do not get this confused with intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. That is not what this is, okay? These are mechanisms that I believe are deep within us that either create or support motivation. And so the internal is more psychological and physiological. The external is more environmental and culture oriented. So what is the physical and psychological? What is that? Well, the physiological part of this could be hormones. This is anything that can have an impact on your motivation. Things like your neurochemical environment, things like your physical activity, your movement during the day, your nutrition. Are you drinking enough water? Your age actually has an impact on this as well. And so there are a lot of things here from a health standpoint, from a physiological standpoint, that can impact. I work with executive leaders all the time. I do executive coaching. And one of the first things I do when I talk with executive leaders, when they tell me, man, I don't have the motivation anymore. I just don't have the drive I had 10 years ago. I'm tired all the time. The first thing I do with them, I don't jump in all this stuff until I do this first thing. And that is, we talk about the baseline physiology of their motivation. And so we talk about nutrition and sleep, and we're talking about hydration. And I implore them to go see their doctor, get blood tests to look at their hormone level, to be able to see, are you up to par on that, so that we know that that's not the thing that's hindering you. Okay, that can be a big cause of having lower motivation or apathy and those sorts of things. Now, that's the physiology part. The other part is the psychological part. And this is more of kind of what we want to get into here. And this is where we really rely on the intrinsic values. And by the way, basic desires theory, I typically, when I'm working in the book, as well as when I'm working with my clients, I am referring to these values as intrinsic values, because I believe that gives us a way of talking about them being deeply internal, not extrinsic, but deeply internal and also values oriented. And it takes away some of this, kind of talking about desires often, at least in the United States, when you bring up the word desires, can people ask a lot of questions about that. What do you mean? Is this, sexually driven? Is this biologically driven, and that sort of thing? And so being able to use intrinsic values really helps us really kind of connotate internal and deeply held values that we have. But these intrinsic values are what we would say are the intrinsic basic desires that Reese in his research gave us. When you put the external together, the external side is the environment, which can be a lot of different things. It could be your physical setting. It could be the treatment. It could be how you interact with your coworkers, how customers treat you. But it's also cultural. And in cultural, it could be what are your standards and expectations on the job? It could be the values that your organization or your company has. It could be the goals, even to the point of level of inclusivity that you may have on a daily basis. Okay. Now, what we know from the science is that, and especially Deci and Ryan and basic or in I'm drawing a blank here. Deci and Ryan's theory, you will notice that in there they have one of their big key areas is in the relational part, the relatedness piece of this. And this is a big part, I believe, of the external environment. We also know that people can be hindered or supported in levels of motivation, at least self-reported, based on a variable is the environment around them. And so these are things that we have to remember. And what I've done is created a different perspective, what I believe I call it the frame for work, or a framework, which is a perspective for how we can actually put self-determination theory. That's what I was trying to think. I drew a blank on Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory. And this is, they have a lot in that theory, a lot of the research that's actually been validated over the last 10 or 15 years. In my research, I looked at these components as well and provided partial validation in the workplace, where environment can really support or hinder a person's level of motivation. Now, let me step back for a moment, because if Dr. Reese was here with us today, I'm almost certain he would debate me on this. And I think that would be great, because in a way, I see very clearly his perspective, because Dr. Reese would likely say, yes, the external environment's important to some extent, but it all goes back the external in supporting what is internal, and there really only being intrinsic motivation. And so this is the duality of my thinking. I agree with that. However, I see the practical application in performance management of knowing how important the external environment is for people, how it does support and can actually even boost a person's level of energy and motivation and encourage engagement and higher levels of performance. I hope you can see that there. I hope you see how those things work together. Now, I call this, when these things come together and they're doing it well, I call this activation. This is where we activate the brains of people. Imagine this. You're in a situation where physiologically, psychologically, you've got intrinsic values that are in alignment with your work. External, you've got a great environment and a great culture. That is where, and by the way, we know there's a big piece of this in this environment of how important a boss is relationship, or a leader's relationship is with you, or with the person that you're trying to lead in performance. That is it's a pivotal relationship that dictates a lot of how a person approaches their engagement and performance. And so when you put these things together, this can be a very powerful process for helping people to support their intrinsic motivation, but also lead them into higher levels of engagement and performance. So these intrinsic values obviously has these desires, these basic desires, and then the external, what I call the external framework, is a frame that you're trying to build. You're trying to frame your culture, is freedom, relationships, ability, meaning, and energy. And so you can see this is a bit of an expansion on self-determination theory, which self-determination theory is autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Okay, what I've done is expanded it out to make this more practical for people when I work with leaders, when I'm coaching leaders, I'm speaking to leaders, consulting with them. I'm saying build environments, build cultures that give people freedom and autonomy, build relationships and support between people, create a sense of ability so people feel like they can get their work done. It's not too easy, but it's not too hard. We know this is supported by flow theory and Csikszentmihalyi's theory of having that ratio, that balance of challenge, but also of skill to be able to go along with it. And that's that flow channel that psychologist Csikszentmihalyi has written about for the past 40 years now. Meaningfulness. What does meaning mean? Draw a line, dotted line back to intrinsic values. Now, how do we connect what we're doing in our job with our intrinsic values? And then energy is really the pride, the sense of what we're doing, and the positivity of the environment that actually we now know through brain science is contagious. And so there's lots of great research out there that shows the level of or the type of energy, positive, negative, connotative, dissonant, those types of things impact a person's perspective, their brain chemistry, and even their motivation levels, right? And so all this very fascinating. I'd love to go into this deeper, but just really can't because of time. But let's keep marching forward because let's talk about the practical application of this. What I do, and in my book here called Activator, I share and I put all of this into what I call 3 practices. It's hard for me to talk about all this science and theory and things like that to a group of people who they just want to go out and be able to be a better leader. They want to go out and be able to help their kids. They want to be a better parent. They want to be better at what they do, or they want to lead other people better. And so what I've done is created really this simple 3-part or 3 practices of activators. And it brings all of what we've talked about into 3 daily practices. And these are the 3 daily practices. And I'm going to give you your 7 strategies under these daily practices. Okay. So the first one is connecting. Then there's coaching. And then the third one's culturing. Notice there's an ing on the end of them. One of the reasons I put the ing on the end of them is because I want to connotate that this is ongoing. You don't just do it and you reach an endpoint. Leaders need to be doing these things every day. How do you bring out the best in your people? To be their best, to do their best in work and in life? Leaders that are activating the brains of other people, that are being people who are facilitating motivation on a daily basis, thinking about connecting, coaching, and culturing. I know I'm an organizational psychologist. I've spent more than 20 years helping organizations implement leadership competencies. I think leadership competencies are a good thing, especially when you're evaluating, you're doing 360 assessments, you're measuring, and you're trying to work on some specific skills. That can be helpful. The idea here is, how do you wake up each morning and say, you know what, as a leader, I want to be an activator. I want to bring out the best in my people. What do I need to be thinking about? And it's much easier to think on a daily basis or evaluate yourself by saying, how did I connect with people today? Was I coaching? Did I coach performance today? And finally, am I building the type of culture every day that helps people to thrive? And if we can get people focused on those 3 things, we can really make a difference in leadership and how people are led in our world, I believe. So let's look at each one of these in brief. You can read about these a lot more in my book and go deep in that. Connecting is the first one. This is cultivating trust through our relationships. there is a part of a study within neuroscience called the social brain. And these are some of the key mechanisms, key parts of the brain that really is how we work and so how we manage relationships, how we communicate with other people. It is fascinating. And one of the things we really now know better than what we knew 20 to 30 years ago is that we communicate beyond our verbal language and our body language. You go to any type of communication seminar now, and everybody talks about verbal language and about body language, and body language being the big thing. In the future, even now, I'm trying to push the fact that we actually communicate through our electrical impulses, through our hormonal excretions, and through our intentions. And I know for some people that is maybe beyond where they can think right now. And that's okay. But there is really good evidence that just our presence with other people, we can pick up on communication, we can pick up on their intention through our olfactory. In fact, there's some really interesting research that's pretty new out there that even shows that, and some of you might think this is kind of gross or kind of disgusting, but there's research that shows when we shake someone's hand or we touch someone, more often than will touch our face. And this is a subconscious way of trying to take in that person's hormonal makeup, their neurochemistry, so that we can then make a subconscious determination to whether we trust that person or not, or what they're saying, what they're doing, is it consistent with their intention? Now, we know that that higher levels of testosterone rub off on people. Higher levels of estrogen have impact on other people. You can look at this research. It's absolutely fascinating. One of our senses, the olfactory sense, it takes in and makes it and interprets the intentions of other people. And this is why I talk often about the power of intention. You may think you're hiding your intention, but leaders need to really build intention if they're really going to bring out the best of people and have that positive intention, that you're really there to help someone to be their best, not take advantage of them. Also in the research are the power of words. And the research by John Barr and his research team, Alison Wood Brooks at Harvard University, fascinating around how words prime us for motivation and behavior and performance. Now, these are some examples of some words that can prime us. John Barr and his actually took groups of people in his research study, and they primed them with either negative words or positive words. The positive words were around caring and trust and collaboration. The negative words were around competition, around distrust, around interrupt, ignore, those sorts of things. And they found that when they put these people into actually work groups to work, that the groups that were primed with the more positive, or let me say it this way, with the more negative words, they interrupted and showed more disrespectful behavior 60% more often than the people who were primed with the positive words. This is one of a number of different studies that show the power of words and how we prime people to behave in certain ways. Alison Wood Brooks and her work at Harvard actually shows that you can replace certain words, like replacing words anxiety with excited, and how you have significantly improved performance outcomes, anywhere from academic tests all the way to singing karaoke and your accuracy in karaoke. Pretty amazing. And so when we connect with people, we have to be thinking about our words, and we also have to be thinking about our values. And that's kind of the key. The third piece of this is intention's important, words are important, body language is important, but what about how we connect with others related to who they are deep inside their intrinsic values? So we want to try to connect and understand everyone's intrinsic values and help others to understand them well, because that gives us this appreciation. And you all know this theory well enough, I'll say it that way, this theory well enough to understand the importance of understanding when someone has an opposite value. If you've got a strong value in one area and they have a weak, you see that there can be conflict. But when we learn and understand these things together, we see how we can bring appreciation to it. We can head off conflict, and we actually can bring in more strength into our relationships. And so when you look at these strategies, 3 strategies to take away from this section here for connecting, it's this: set your intention daily, especially before important interactions, or those interactions maybe where you're going to be giving constructive feedback, or there could be confrontation. Strategy number 2, integrate activation words into your communication. What are activation words? There's certainly some in the research you can look at, some I had in the last slide, but here's the thing: is typically your activation words are going to be more positive, emotional type of activation words. Okay. Things like you saw on the last slide that are positive around, hey, how do you build in things like collaboration and cooperation, performance, engagement, being complete. You can even use words that are not typical words that may be important in your environment. Like a lot of deep work people I've worked with will use words like dial it in. Let's do our deep work. Let's get focused. And these things can be activation words that really prime the brain to do what you want it to do. And then finally, mine the intrinsic values of others. Look for them, understand them, and teach other people how to look for them in other people. Because when they do, they better understand it. They're going to be better at being able to manage themselves and manage the relationships with other people. All right, here we go. Got 2 more. We can get this done. All right, here we go. Coaching is the next one. And I think most of you are familiar with the idea of coaching. And this is how, as a leader, we facilitate performance with both backbone and heart. How we actually bring the balance in of being able to drive results while caring for people at the same time. And there are different types of methodologies for coaching, but the idea around coaching is, how do we bring about upfront direct expectations and feedback with also caring for someone and appreciating who they are as a person. Got great research around this. We found that if you're more of a threat type of coach where you're demanding, you bring out feelings of guilt and obligation, and you actually activate the parts of the brain that are stress-oriented and feelings of self-consciousness. In essence, meaning that when you use this, people tighten up, they don't give their best, they can't give their best. Now, Thrive coaches, when you are using more of the positive perspective of coaching, where you have mutual goals, where you're supporting that person towards their goals, you're helping them become self-directed by asking good questions, helping them take autonomy in their work. What you're doing is you're activating the part of the brain that's responsible for vision, motivation, positive emotion, connection, and even the calming or the stress modulation part of the brain. So coaching, when done right, is highly effective. And when we bring in the basic desires theory into this, one of the things I think is important for coaching is coaching the connection between a person's intrinsic values and their work. So what that means is, you as a leader, is you've got to know and got to have discussions around what these desires are they have that motivate them, that they're deeply connected with, that are deeply intrinsic for them, and then work to try to help them see and experience, and even in some ways help them have this relationship with this part of their work. Now, we know we don't all like every part of our work, but even if we can build in that connection with even small pieces of our work, there's evidence to show that makes our work very enjoyable, worthwhile, and can enhance our motivation. Some examples of this might be someone who has a strong desire for order. You're helping connect that with the processes that they have put into place or that they follow, their structure in that. How about curiosity? Someone who's strong in that. Get them connected with learning something and sharing that, or being an expert in their work. How about idealism? Someone who's strong maybe in idealism. Connect them with the cause or what difference they're making through their work or to help other people. In honor, right? Honor, there's a great evidence around people respond in a team environment when they're fighting something, when they're all doing something together to bring something better or fight something within their world. For instance, COVID, a lot of people in the medical field will say that a part of keeping motivation during the time of COVID-19 was remembering the fight that they were in and battling, and we were in this together, and we were fighting side by side to beat this illness, right? Beauty, right? I work with a lot of people who are in construction, a lot of men that you would think wouldn't like beauty. Guess what? They score high and strong in beauty. And so one of the things we try to make sure that we're constantly connecting them with is the beauty of their product, the building they build, the home that they build, and that what they're giving to other people and how they're sharing the beauty with other people in their world. Now, I could give you dozens and dozens of more of these examples, but this is where you come in. As you're working with people, help make the connection, coach the connection through good questions and through observation as well. So activation strategy number 4, coach the connection between values and work. And then number 5 is this: keep the edge by providing positive and constructive feedback. And so we look in the performance data. One of the things that's very important is that we keep the edge. This is that idea of how do you keep in that zone, that flow zone of performance zone, is helping someone keep the edge, not be too bored, continue to be challenged, but at the same time, not be overwhelmed. And then we do that well in coaching when we both provide positive feedback, but also constructive feedback. And we let people know to expect both from us as leaders. All right, here's the final one, and that is culturing. And this is setting and upholding standards of excellence. And this really gets into that external mechanism of motivation and engagement. And when you think about the social brain, this is very important for the culturing piece of this. We all have the desire to work in a place where we can excel, and it takes it to the next level when we can excel and we can achieve at a higher level with other people. And so as leaders, what we're trying to do is help people on a daily basis see that whenever they can achieve at a higher level with the support and help of other people, then that actually that gives them the environment to be their best, that other people want to be their best. And so for leaders, this takes more than just working one-on-one with people. This is about how are we building this set of standards and expectations for how we work together as people, how we achieve greater together than we do individually. It's also the standards that we set and that we allow. The highest level of success your organization will be able to achieve will be determined by the lowest level of behavior you're willing to accept of your people. We know the research tells us that when a person is motivated, their motivation can be decreased. It can be hindered when they see other people around them not being held accountable for their work, their effort, their performance. So as a leader, it's really important that we're thinking about this from a contextual, from a culture standpoint of how we help everyone rise together. Not just individuals are not accepting that some people are behaving or performing in a way that's not conducive, that supports the team. In fact, I'll say this, I'm seeing more and more in organizations today changing their performance management formulas. It's not just hitting your numbers. It's not just individual contribution. Today, you're seeing more and more, especially the high-performing organizations, you're now seeing that total performance is about individual performance plus team contribution. It's not enough just to go and hit your numbers. You have to be hitting your numbers while supporting your team to hit their numbers. And that is indeed how we culture. And when we know we have people around us doing that, it enhances and motivates us. You know, when we look at a culture, it can easily be seen as chaos because we're all different. Dr. Reese would say that through his RMP that you can get several billion different variations in terms of measurement for people. And I believe that is an amazing thing. There's no other assessment that's like that, that actually respects and leverages the uniqueness of every person. And in our cultures, we have to look at that as being unique, but something to leverage. If we don't, we look at it as chaos. And we're like all these different pieces that when you look at it, doesn't make a lot of sense. But when we can learn to bring in the differing intrinsic values and these desires we have and piece part them together like a puzzle where we actually compensate for one another, and some have weaknesses and have strengths, and we're blind in some areas, but someone who's blind because they're strong in one area they may not see something that someone weak in that area can see, right? And so it's through this, when we take a better look at this, that our culture, made up of lots of different pieces. And even as one person said to me after a keynote, they said, you know what? It makes a lot of sense because we all are a bunch of broken pieces. But when you put us together in the right way with a good leader, working together, we become a beautiful mosaic together. And that's the idea of culturing. How do we bring people together even though we're different? And when we are different, we actually can be brought together in a more beautiful way. Imagine a painting where you only could use one color. Imagine art where we could only use one color. Wouldn't be very pretty, would it? So here's your strategies. Highlight difference and diversity as a strength. Utilize the RMP when you're using this with people to show the difference and how that can be a strength and can be diversity that you can leverage for the success of your team. And here's the last one, and that's find and tell stories, because this is a key part of doing a couple of things. Number one, when we bring these stories, it engages the brain. If you want to build your culture, use the great stories of your culture. That's going to help engage your brain. Here's the other thing it does. It lifts a person's imagination and it connects people with their intrinsic values. When you are listening to a story, you are listening from a context of your life and your values. And when you connect with those values, it can be motivational and help you connect with the values of the organization that you're in, the team that you're on. Well, I'll leave you with this quick story that I think brings it all together for this. And this is a guy named Rodney, and he was the vice president at a bank. And I was doing training for all of Rodney's group, all of his managers and leaders in his organization. And one of his direct reports, who's standing next to him, her name's Millie. She came to this training, drove 2 hours, had other managers with her, drove 2 hours to this training, and she loses her key to the van that they carpooled in. So now her and her team are 2 hours away from home, and they have lost the keys, and she realized where she lost the key. She actually accidentally flushed them down the toilet. And she was really upset about this and embarrassed. She had to call her boss, Rodney, and she said, Rodney, I'm so sorry. I really screwed up. I messed up. I flushed the keys down the toilet, and I don't know how we're going to get home. Rodney says, don't worry about it. Go to your training. We'll figure something out by this afternoon. So Millie goes to training. We have a good training day. Close to the end of the day, I look in the back of the room, and Rodney is there, and he pops his head in. He says, hey, Jason, can I come talk to the group? And I said, certainly. There were about 40 people there. All of his underline, all of his managers and directors that report to him. And he stands up in front of the room with a bag in his hand. And he says, I want Millie to come up here. And Millie she's kind of embarrassed, but she stands up there in front of him. And Rodney begins to say this. You know, Millie's worked for me for 4 years, and she is constantly bailing me out. She's constantly saving me when I mess up and make mistakes. I so appreciate Millie, and it's about time I get to save her from a mistake. And so she starts growing the smile on her face. And then he says, so what I did is I decided to drive myself here, and I wanted to make sure she didn't lose her key. So I made a keychain for it so she doesn't lose it. And that's when he pulled this keychain out of the bag and showed the entire group. And I have a picture of that actually, so you can see it yourself. And here is what he pulled out. So the group just died laughing because they saw that he created this keychain on his own that's a plunger for a toilet in case it goes down the toilet again. Now, let me ask you this question. How much do you think that story has been told in that organization? It's been told all over his organization, but in many, many parts of that organization, because he's a leader that was putting into practice the type of culture he said that he wanted. And my alarm's going off here. He is a leader that put that into practice, and he did it with his actions, and it became a story that people gravitated towards, and it was fun, and it actually showed the type of culture they were trying to build. And so utilizing stories connects people. So utilize those stories for yourself and for your people that you work with, and help them see the stories in their lives that connect with people and bring out their intrinsic values to be their best and do their best. Okay. Connecting, coaching, and culturing. I hope today was helpful for you. I hope that you got some things you could take away with you in this short amount of time. I know I talked fast. I'm sorry about that, but I hope it was helpful. I would love to connect with you. Here's some ways that you can connect with me. I also have a free download white paper called Lead with the Brain and Mind, and it's 5 ways to use brain science to boost employee engagement and performance. You can download that. You can use the QR code there, or you can go to my website as well for that. And I'm going to turn this back over. Thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much, Jason. Yeah, we normally keep a bit uploads, so let's keep bit uploads here or virtually. Thank you so much for this. Do you still have a few minutes to stay? I know we have another presentation coming up for some questions. Do you have time for that?
Yeah, I've got probably about 5 minutes or so, and then I have to head out. Yes.
All right. So, dear colleagues who are there, just if anybody has a question, please, now it's your turn, or any comment. And in case not, I can also check the chat. What's in the chat? Okay, Janne Kilpeläinen asking, can you see the chat? I can read it to you. So any perspectives on how brain works while in very positive relations with boss and team, but in an environment which is highly threatening and perceived dangerous and hostile? So how does the brain work there? So the immediate team is positive, but then the bigger environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of environments that are like that. And what we want to try to do as much as we possibly can, make those environments better. I understand that you're not always going to do that. And so what we want to do is we want to ballast a person's ability to build their own resilience and stress tolerance. We can ballast that by making relationships as positive as we can get them. Okay. Making the team as positive as we can get them. And so these are actually probably, from a brain perspective, what you're trying to do is give recovery, bring back into homeostasis and balance the neurochemistry that is likely in the fire is highly cortisol oriented, highly adrenaline oriented. And then we want to give those people time to recover. And we want to balance that out or give them the more positive chemicals when they're with the team. And so if that makes sense, we want to be able to pull them out at times, give them rest and recovery and tools for rest and recovery, so then they can go back in the fire. You can look this up, the Yerkes-Dodds stress curve. And this has been used for more than 100 years. It shows the higher your performance, the higher the stress, typically the higher performance, until it gets to a certain point. And then it drops off. What happens is a lot of people stay up in that top area, which could be a high performance zone, but I also call it the burn zone. And we can only stay up there so long. And how do we manage and actually build strength to be able to manage that a little bit better, or maybe even higher levels of stress, is that we're able to come off of that through recovery. So then we're able to go back to it again. A formula for disaster is keeping people in that burn zone for too long. They will not stay there. They will be demotivated. They will look to get out. They'll quit.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. Any other short question coming up? There are lots of thank yous for very inspiring session and people asking for the slides. So yeah, good news is we recorded this and we can watch it again. And I certainly will. So many interesting ideas to dig deeper. And also I can highly also recommend the Activator book. It's a very interesting, also easy reading. So I'm also using it in my as a recommended reading for my for the university students, master students I'm teaching at the university. And very much looking forward to that. Yes, and for all those who are here who don't know the context, the Risk Motivation Profile, Nordic or RMP Nordic organized this event. And if you got curious about what is this, these intrinsic values and the Risk Motivation Profile, you can contact us or other colleagues who know about it. But with this, once again, thank you very much, Jason and Jones. Dr. Jason Jones was this fantastic presentation. I really hope this is just the beginning for a collaboration, and we could invite you to Europe to meet us again, maybe in another event. And fantastic. I will
love it.
You to my colleagues in the US personally. Once again, thank you so much for being there, and have a lovely day. And yeah, all the best for this new year as well. And thank you everybody for joining. Hope to see you in another webinar or face-to-face somewhere. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Very excellent and practical lesson. Thank you.